excited. Let me just hit that button. We are so excited to share with you today what we learned from families. So we had the opportunity to sit down with family members of students who participated in a recent model demonstration project that we had in the state of Maryland. This project was funded by RSA, and it focused on work-based learning opportunities. So again, really excited to hear from families about the value of work experiences for students before they leave high school. And all three of us are family members, and two of us have transition-aged youth who are currently, hopefully, participating in work experiences. So let's talk about what we hope you take away from today's session. So next slide, please. So we hope that you have a better understanding of the relationship between family involvement and work experiences for youth with disabilities. We're going to talk to you about families' expectations, their concerns, and what they think are barriers, and engaging them in collaborating for that career planning and that career development process for their child. And then finally, we're going to share with you some key strategies to promote family engagement in the work experience process. So what do we mean by families and family involvement? So family members, when we talk about family members, we're talking about parents, guardians, foster parents, siblings, extended family members. Next slide, please. And we know that family members really offer a unique perspective and valuable information to the transition planning process. We know that families are that constant in that young person's life. They're the constant observer, they're the constant participant, and they're the constant collaborator in that young person's development. We know too that youth benefit when families are involved. We know that if we are informing families about the services that are available through education, employment services, and other community services, if families are aware of these services, they can better support their young person in making informed decisions about their future, specifically about their career future and their work future. Next slide, please. So why is family involvement so critical? So research has demonstrated that families who are involved in their students' lives and in their educational experience achieve better post-school outcomes. So we know it's been cited as a predictor that leads to success after the student leaves high school. We know that when families are involved in some of those evidence-based practices, we know when families are involved, they have higher expectations for what their young person can achieve. When families are involved, they're getting all that information that's necessary to really engage in that transition process and planning. And they recognize what some of the issues and responsibilities are around disability and legislative rights, if you will. So one practice is to make sure that all these families are receiving the necessary information. And when you're giving them the necessary information, they are able to learn about those services and supports in the community. And we as professionals can better connect them to those services, both the youth and the families. And we know that transition process from school to work can be really hard for youth and families to navigate. So again, it's a good practice to inform families of all the services and supports that are available. And it's really important to make sure that they're a partner with school staff and other transition staff. So we're going to pause here for a moment. I want to share a video with all of you. This video is of Christopher and his mother, Melise. And Christopher was part of our model demonstration project and participated in work-based learning. And this video talks about their decision to have Christopher participate in our model demo, which we called Way to Work. So you may hear us say that in the video, just real quickly. They do use the term doors. In Maryland, we call our VR system doors. So the Department of Rehabilitative Services. So you're going to hear doors, and you might hear Weeble. And in Maryland, we call work-based learning experiences Weebles. So I just wanted to clarify that for you. So here's the video.
When I was in school, I worked with doors, and I knew how much the program could possibly help him with learning what he would want to do, because I took a trade that everyone says I'm good at, but once I started doing the trade, I didn't love it. So I wasted time learning something that I'm not going to use. So I was like, at least he will get to try some stuff before he just goes out there and be like, oh, this is what I'm going to try. I got connected with the program during his IEP meeting. One of the teachers was saying, well, you might want to try this program out and see if you can. And we were like, okay, because I knew the DOOR program itself was a good program. The way we were involved planning, it was very much, we were able to tell her, hey, this is what he wants to do, and he has a person in mind. Let's call that person to see if they were willing to help him and work with him. Because some people don't like to take on student and teacher roles. They just like, I want to work. But Mr. Dalton was very like, I want to teach him so he can see what goes along with doing a job like this.
He was my mentor. I found him later in my school year when I was around junior and sophomore, and he was during a work expo. And recently during the program, I asked, can I get him to help me and mentor me up? And he agreed. Luckily, he did agree. So I've been under his wing for a little bit. What I did was mostly when I was with my mentor for the first part, I worked with him during fish tanks. He taught me how to do fish tanks. He he convinced me to go to college. So I'm going to go to AAC, the college he goes to, and work there and probably go into biology. And the second part is with another man who was there named Eric, who was the lead project for the science center in my school. All I did was help him maintain the tanks, and make sure to schedule animals cleaning and stuff like that.
Thank you. So that was Christopher, again, one of our students who participated in the Way to Work project, and his mother, Melise, and talking about their decision to be involved. And as you heard from the mother, she wasn't in a career necessarily that was of interest and met her skills. So she wanted Christopher to have this experience, and they made the decision together to have him involved in this project. Just so you know, we're putting the links to these YouTube videos in the chat box if you want to go back and watch them. So next slide, please. Let's talk about the purpose of the study we did with parents. So as I mentioned, we know that family involvement and work-based learning experiences are both cited as evidence-based practices to improve that college and career readiness of youth with disabilities. Yet we couldn't find a lot of information or a lot of research out there documenting how families are involved in the planning for and facilitating work experiences and paid employment for their young person. So we were really interested in that. We wanted to learn about any information about the role of the family in preparing their child for work. And we wanted to learn directly from parents and guardians who, again, their child was participating in this project. So 3 big questions guided this work that we did, this research that we did. How are families engaged in planning for and facilitating work-based experiences for their child? Why are families engaged? So why do they get involved in this process with their child? And then we wanted to know what strategies worked to engage them or would work to best engage them. And that includes communicating with them on the work-based learning process. So that's what we sought to do with this study we did with parents. So next slide, please. Just real quickly, how we did this is we conducted a series of focus groups. We looked at family members of students who were part of our treatment groups. So they were receiving the intervention, which again was focused on work-based learning. And we worked across 7 of our local school districts in the state of Maryland. Of course, all the students were screened for eligibility. We received their consent. This was in the era of COVID, in the middle of lockdown. So these focus groups were completed virtually. We use Zoom or WebEx to do them. All of them are recorded, and they were about an hour in length. And each, we had a range of participants from anywhere from 2 at a time to about 8 or 9 at a time. So next slide. Real quickly, I talked about the 3 big questions we sought to answer: how they engage, why they engage, and strategies to engage them. But really, this gets a little deeper at our focus. We wanted to understand the family's role in the work-based learning process. We wanted to hear their perspective about the value of work-based learning experiences for their child, their perceptions of the agencies that they were working with. So in the case of our model, it was a collaboration between school personnel, VR staff, our DOORS staff, and CRPs, our community rehab providers. And then what would increase the effectiveness of delivering these services, these work-based learning services to youth from the parent perspective. So I will turn it over to Banu, and she'll talk a little bit more about the data analysis.
Thank you, Kelly. Next slide, please. So we used consensual qualitative research approach by Hill, 2012. So this design summarizes the data that we get to draw conclusions through objective means. It focuses on addressing any researcher bias or any other limitations of qualitative analysis through a consensus process. We focused on developing a list of domains using a few transcripts, and we had an auditor review these domains. We got feedback, updated them. We developed core ideas for each of our transcripts, and then divided the data under each domain into categories and subcategories. And this was again reviewed by an auditor. And we updated our analysis process based on the feedback that we had. The next slide, please. The research team consisted of 3 researchers and 1 auditor. It was 4 females, with 2 of them being white, 1 Black, and then 1 South Asian graduate student. 3 researchers were experts in the field of vocational rehabilitation, and 1 is a graduate student with research experience in CQR. Coming to the participants in our study, next slide, please. Thank you. So overall, we had 15 participants representing 14 students who participated in the work-based learning experience. Out of these 15 participants, 13 were female and 2 were male. The students belonged to different races, out of which 8 of them were white, 3 Black, 1 Asian, 2 multiracial students, and each of the students had at least 1 work-based learning experience. The specific disabilities of their children reported by the parents were attention deficit disorder, emotional disorder, learning disability, visual impairment, to name a few, and then there were also others. And the graph here shows that. Next slide. So through this process, through the CQR process, we have identified 8 domains from the data. The first being youth learning experiences through work-based learning experience from parents' perspective, aspects of the WBL process from the parents' perspective, parental perception of effectiveness of the participating agencies, their perceptions of the role of parents, hopes of parents for their children, and their recommendations for increasing effectiveness of the WBL process. And although not intended, we also had parents talking about the impact of COVID. And we had another domain of other, which felt like there were certain things that didn't fit in anywhere else, but were important enough to capture in our data. Each of these domains, next slide, please. This is a graph this is a table of all of our data and how it is divided. So each domain, each of our 8 domains have several categories under them, and some of them have subcategories. Depending on the number of participants we have for each category, the frequencies were calculated, which you see on the right of this table, with 13 or 14 parents talked about this particular category, it becomes general. And then if it's 8 to 12, it's typical in the data, and 4 to 7 is variant. We will be talking about all of these domains in much detail as we move forward. But as you can see, the first domain had 4 categories under them, where when parents talked about learning experiences through WBLs, they talked about like learning on the job skills, employability and self-determination skills, clarifying career interests, and job search skills. Next slide, please. And this is a continuation of, again, all of our domains and how each categories fall under each of these domains. Next slide. Thank you. I will pass on to Amy to talk about each of these domains in detail.
Hello, thank you, Banu. Okay, I'm going to go over some of the domains, and this was through that process. I know that Banu explained that was, we gained consensus and we coded and themed. It was a long process of coding and theming and then coming to consensus. So this is, the real details. We give examples here of some of the transcripts that guided us. But the first one is youth learning experiences through work-based learning experiences from the parents' perspective. And the sort of the subcategory themes that fell out was learning, first of all, just learning on the job skills. So this was sort of in reference to the tasks that were learned during these work-based learning experiences, whether it's customer service, how to assist people. Here it was better conversation skills, working diligently and quickly. And these were all the skills that they listed off. Employability and self-determination skills was a little more reference to some of the soft skills. Accepting guidance, navigating the work world. So that's sort of navigating the work culture and how to get along in a work culture. So those really popped out. Clarifying some career interests, abilities, and goals. So this is that whole career development aspect of it, how it was an awesome opportunity for our kids, and realized he did not want to do that for the rest of his life. So that was something that came up a lot, that focusing on their interest from the beginning and then letting them try it is either going to have 2 outcomes. They loved it or they didn't love it, and both are important and a success. So there was a lot of that clarifying or even changing minds. And then just job search skills as well. So that's sort of that concept of career advancement or moving on after you've had a work experience. So next slide, please. The next domain was aspects of the WBL process, so sort of the logistics. So the real focus there that fell out a lot was the job application and how to select a job, that whole process. The next one, there was a little bit of the emotional impact, and that was anything from growth to confidence, to anxiety, whatever. It could be negative, it could be positive, but how it emotionally impacted the students. And then The last one was benefits or other supportive factors that came from them. So in this case, it was getting paid is certainly a benefit. Sometimes they talked about the support factor or the knowledge gained as an additional benefit to the whole process of getting a work-based learning experience. So next slide. The next one, there were subcategories because this is this, I'm sure all of you have experienced this when you do any sort of training or working with families, challenges come out. So we had to subcategorize the various challenges. And for any of you who've been in the field for a very long time, one of the biggest challenges that people often talk about is transportation. And when it comes to work experiences, this came out. I mean, the first quote says, I think transportation was the big one. So managing schedules, driver's license, kids are busy, parents are working. A lot of that came out as well. And then on the job expectations as well is going in what students expected, what was expected of them from their supervisors and their supports. There was a lot of talk about that. Job search. What were some of the difficulties in finding a job, and whether it was related to their disability, whether it was related to the market. And we had some discussion even of COVID. And then another big one was just scheduling, because as we learned, high school students are really, really busy and they're really structured and have lots of activities, and trying to schedule a work-based learning experience into their busy schedule often became a challenge. So that was something that we had learned as well. Next slide, please. Effectiveness of the partner agencies. So this is that whole collaborative team. To what level were all the members that they were working with, all the different partners that they were working with, effective for the family, in the family's perspective? So collaboration and communication, that was the big one. Am I getting the information? And we've heard this from families before. To what level are you including me in these conversations? To what level am I informed? So in this quote right here, Doors, which is our Voc Rehab, has been a lot more hands-on. We communicate. She applies for jobs, explaining the whole communication process. We have tons of quotes on that, as you can see, as well as the actual service delivery. What were the details? How were they looking to find work? You know, how effective was it in the way they worked with their child? And then other perceptions like neutral. I didn't have any type of interaction, but that was okay. Like, so it wasn't that they were complaining about the level of communication. They were merely stating, this was my perception about how this worked. And it wasn't positive or negative for me. So we wanted to include those as well, the neutral comments. And then we looked a lot at what was ineffective, the lack of collaboration and communication. So it was on both sides, that they could communicate, that there was collaboration, and then there was the breakdown in communication and collaboration in those same subcategories. Collaboration, communication, service delivery, staff turnover. That came up enough that was something that we had to code. And that was true in those adult service agencies, that they would start with a counselor and lose a counselor, and how that affected their child in a work-based learning experience, how it affected them in starting communication over again. And that we got like a day's notice and they were gone, and now we're waiting to hear back from who's going to pick up. We heard that a lot, and we've heard that over time, but it did definitely come up in these. And then just the lack of information. There is a lot going on for, you know, students receiving supports through special education. And then we added a whole nother layer with work-based learning experiences and all the various partners. And as we know, these were for students in their final 2 years of high school. And so it did come up that that's a kind of a scary time, and you need a lot of information. It felt like they didn't know enough. So the role of parents. So this was interesting is, what did they feel like from their perspective, what did they feel like their role was? And so advocacy came out. I am there to support, to be an advocate, to fight for what my child needs, what my child wants, and to keep fighting for your kids. So advocacy came out a lot. The other subcategory was to initiate and maintain collaboration with the agencies. And a lot of them talked about, it came up a lot that I constantly, as a parent, would have to initiate. I would have to check in. Like there would be a lack of communication and I would, restart it. I would re-engage the conversation. Transportation, because that was a challenge. And I think came out as a challenge because in many cases, this was a pre-employment transition service, this work-based learning experience, and that does not include transportation. That was often on the parents. So they thought, well, that's my role, is I got to get my kid to and from work. And then support. To what level do they help their child? Did they help with the application process? Stuff that they would, in this case, as parents, if that was familiar, I knew about application processes. So that's where I helped. So talked a little bit about what is the support role of a parent in this process. And I'm going to pass that on then to Banu for the remaining domains.
Thank you, Amy. Next slide, please. So the next domain we have is hopes of parents for their children. And one of the biggest hopes that parents indicated is that their children get opportunities to participate in more work experience. Under that, at least 7 of them talked about exposure, which encompassed like parents' wishes that children find varied work experiences and not one single experience. And they find a career and figure out where their true interests lie rather than just doing any job. An example included like help him find that true desire. He's just working a job. He gets to see what they were like, but now he's out of high school. He's going into the adult world. You don't need just a job. He needs to start finding a career, and there's no real talk of that. Another subcategory included parents' wishes that their children get more training and support. They wanted built-in resources where youth could learn more skills beyond entry-level positions. And one of the quotes, as you can see, indicates that. And also mentorship was another thing that parents hope that the kids get as they are working in their work experiences. Parents also hope that their children learn to be confident about themselves, and the following quote illustrates that hope. To me, it is about that confidence and when they are out on their own and not relying on their parents. Next slide, please. Coming to the next domain, like parents suggested recommendations for improving the effectiveness of the WBL process. And there were 5 categories we identified in this domain. Parents suggested that they engage in the process early for their children and advocate for them, whether it is building a relationship with doors or finding out about programs or following up with involved agencies. They indicated that they have to stay informed and engaged to move the process ahead. Another suggestion parents had is building systems capacity. This included having spots in vocational schools, integrating services offered by different agencies, and having better communication between schools and family, providing transition services and support, soft skills training, and assisting with transportation. So there were several things that parents mentioned with building the systems capacity. They also suggested collaboration with partners that included having partnerships between employers and Way to Work team for easing the employment search process, using the IEP and 504 meetings to provide information to the parents, and using local agencies and local communities to facilitate a smoother WBL process. And one of the quotes that illustrates this is, I really recommend, if it happens again, work with the local grassroots so they'll feel comfortable working with you, not from the top down. Next slide, please. Parents also suggested disseminating information in whatever way possible, whether it is having a brochure which gives information about the players involved and what the program length of the time is, what to expect. And there were also suggestions related to the school and work schedule, some of which included having half days for schools on days where there's work study, or accessing a part-time schedule during senior year to have more time to focus on work-based learning experiences, or having these experiences on weekends. Next domain, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next domain that came up in the data is the impact of COVID. 9 parents indicated changes to work experience in some way, where their children either lost their job or could not get a second work-based learning experiences, had some of the offers rescinded, and also had limited options on where they could work. Parents also indicated changes to post-school plans, where some indicated not going to the school because it has turned online and somehow their children didn't like online schooling, or some choosing to go online schooling because learning has become more easier. Parents also talked about related circumstances, which included increase in anxiety, although not directly impacting either work experience or post-school plans. It did have an impact on mental health. And also some positive experiences of whether being an essential worker helped them continue a job or getting a seasonal job. Next slide, please. Some of the things parents said did not fit directly anywhere, but important that they got placed in the other domain. And this included local cultures, which sometimes varied, whether it is age limit or limit on the programs one can be involved in, or apprenticeships that are available. Parents also talked about the post-WBL school process, where some of the children went on to continue working a job, and some realized they want to go to school and went back to school, and some are still figuring out what they want to do with their careers. And another relevant factor they talked about is the unique personal context of the youth, where some could not work because of an injury or other reasons. And parents talked about how interventions at a personal level could have benefited their children. We have a video clip next about what Christopher and Melissa had to say about the learnings from the WBL process. That'll be our next slide.
Had on me was first, when we first talked, I told him I wasn't thinking about going to college at all. Because I was like, I don't think it's going to be for me. I don't know what I'm going to really do. Because I'm like, I don't know too much about college. So it's like, I was going to avoid it and just get work. Through thick and thin, just work it out somehow. But he convinced me. He showed me different programs in the school. He introduced me to some of the professors. And I was convinced I should go. My plans after graduation is go to AACP. Or AACC, the community college in Rendell. I was thinking about going and take my normal classes while working. I hope I can keep my job while I do it. That's the main thing I want to do. My mentor did convince me to start my own little small business where I might work with animals and teach children around America about the wonderful place of animals, you know? That's basically it. Is because I always been thinking that as a kid that kids nowadays don't understand or respect animals like they should, or have like the knowledge they should have. Like you can just say if they think a fish is a fish, but it's not really a fish. It's could be a mammal, could be anything.
I would never have thought he would be at this point in life. Like at one point, I honestly even thought about dropping out and like pulling him out of school because school was a waste of time for him. He was just sitting there sleeping or not doing work. So I was like, you know what, just pull him out and homeschool him. But being being a part of that program made him want to stay in school, and now it's making him want to continue his education.
Thank you. So again,
did there come a time when your brother and Ms. Hurd started to live together?
Yes.
I don't know if that looked like it was Judge Judy or something. But again, those YouTube clips will be put into the chat box if you want to access them later. And so you just heard from Melissa and Christopher again, and really the value of this experience for Christopher and keeping him engaged in school, and then really helping him find something that he'd like to do and continue to work on. So again, this little sub-study, if you will, was part of a larger project that we conducted in the state of Maryland, focused on work-based learning. Again, we really wanted to hear from parents how they were engaged in the planning for work-based experiences, why they engage, and how to keep them engaged. And really what we learned from this project is that we know work is good. My former boss used to say it all the time, work is good. And we really did learn that from this project, hearing from parents the value of their child participating in work-based learning programs, that it really helped them prepare for college and careers. Many of our students did go on to college, but it also helped them gain the skills that they needed to do job searches. It also gave them the ability to advocate for themselves, be self-determined. They learned what they liked and they learned what they didn't like. So it really helped them clarify their career interests and goals. So next slide, and I'm going to invite my colleague Amy to jump in here, but what we heard from parents through this process, again, really building on some of the research we already know. If you could go back to the previous slide, what parents expressed. And I'll just talk about the first one here quick, but what we heard from parents is they really wanted the focus on the child or their child's long-term career goals. They didn't want them to have a job just to have a job, but they want them to have experiences in those areas that were of interest to them. So they wanted that focus there rather than just applying for a job to have a job. I know there was a comment in the chat box about customized employment. And Amy, I'm going to ask you to talk to this a little bit more, but we did have several students where we customized those work experiences, again, based very specifically on their career interests, but more importantly, their support needs. So that was part of the process as well.
Yeah, if you could go, if we could move to the slide previous to this. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, this is what really we were going for, was what was the real perspective of parents, and that balancing the needs of the family and the job seeker and not having a one size fits all outlook. So really the fact that we did focus on what is it that you as a student are interested in, what type of career, and let's go ahead and search that out, which was really the focus of these work-based learning experiences. Not we have these 15 or 5 to 10 slots and we'll fill you in, really working with the family. So that was something that they appreciated, along with that, you know, helping their child look for a career, not just get a job right now that's a quick fix, but letting them guide them through what they could do next. And one of our focuses, really our outcomes, was to have multiple work-based learning experiences. And that translated to parents as a variety of different placements within an industry, and that they appreciated that their child was able to try a couple of different things, particularly when, and this happens, when a student, you know, tries something and goes, I don't like that. Well, then the experience wasn't just over. It's like, oh, well, okay, well then, you know, and that's it, that's a wrap. Instead we went, okay, what is it that you didn't like about it? Let's find something you do and move on to the next one, which was something that parents appreciated too, which lines up with that matching to their interests, that we didn't just have those slots. One thing that they did say is they would have liked, this was a lot of support for them to do these work-based learning experiences and to customize it, that they wish they had more support once they left, as they were getting ready to leave. And isn't that the battle of transition that we face everywhere, is trying to make that seamless transition and guiding families through that, you know, these entitlement services to eligibility, and maintaining those supports. And that came up as, gosh, I wish that were easier. So now next slide, please. So then we looked at comparing it to some of the strategies that worked, that made, that were solutions to some of the issues that the families brought up. Transportation is one. I always feel like, oh, it's always a challenge. And I'm not sure we can always, fix that or make that better. But partway through, there was transportation stipends that were given. And that was something that, I guess it made swallowing the pill of transportation issues a little easier. That there was support from the community, so that, we worked, part of the model was to work really closely with employer partners and with the community to make these work-based learning experiences strong. And that was something that did work. We worked with the geographic area, worked with the community that they were in, so that there would be a continuation after they left school in one way to help that. And also that earlier engagement. And we talked about earlier, high school students are very, very busy and their schedules are crazy. And that we had started all of our research, at the very beginning of their junior school year. And we looked back and thought we should have started the summer before their junior year to give us 2 summers, because summers were easier to manage work schedules. And that's when parents made it clear they wanted their kids to work. They don't want them sitting at home then, and they don't have those school schedules, and that would be better to capitalize on that time in terms of the schedule. And other things that help with collaboration, always, the more communication that happens between the partners that are supporting you, the better the communication is with the families. So having local interagency teams, which was something that we built in to the process, that really all the way down to student level, problem solving at student level, was a way to not have some of these issues, fall through the cracks. There was accountability because there was just so many eyes on these students and families. Always consistency and stability with the staff. That came up. Staff turnover makes things hard. So being consistent and having stable staff makes things easier and makes the collaboration, the communication stronger. And there was a lot of that. I didn't have enough information, or if I had known about this sooner, could we get more information regarding work-based learning opportunities and pre-ed services as soon as we entered high school? That the earlier, the better, as well. And then the parental role of both advocating and collaborating. So they didn't want to lead the process, and that was okay, but to be an advocate, to be a part of the process, and to collaborate and work with the team was a strategy that I think really made outcomes much more effective. So next slide. And maybe Banu, if you wanted to talk through a little bit of the impact of COVID.
Sure. In the way that I talked about before, there was some positive impact and some negative, which is that students found that because they had some essential worker jobs or seasonal work options, they were able to continue working. However, there were several cancellations of work experiences, and they were disconnected from the services, and staff that they were working with were also no longer working, which also impacted their communication with the agencies, and career plans and what students wanted to do later on was also impacted because of COVID. As moving forward, I think it would be important, as students miss certain experiences, to normalize their anxiety about making choices, making career choice, and that they're not missing out, but everyone is in a similar boat in terms of figuring out where they need to go.
So I am going to, we're right at the top of the hour, and I know that there's extended learning sessions. Banu, thank you. If we go to the next slide, I think it gives our contact information, but we appreciate you all participating. Oh, tips for engaging families,
Yes.
just real quick. You know, I want to just point out the one here is being flexible. Families are busy. Families work during the day, and we really learned that we needed to engage them weekends, evenings, the end of their driveways. So, you know, we really need to take into consideration the needs of the families as well as the student when working with them. I think we have a couple more slides left, but I do know that I'm getting the signal here that our time is up. So I want to be mindful of that. I know that our slides are available in the VFairs platform. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Again, this was a small sub-study within a larger project that we had in the state of Maryland. Like all of you, our best laid plans were impacted by COVID. So we learned some good information. We would have liked to have a chance to engage with a few more families than what we did, and we look to build off of what we were learning from this. But thank you to everybody. I know that there's lounge sessions now, so if you go back to VFairs, you can join into a lounge. And then I want to thank Amy and Banu and everybody who participated. Have a good rest of the Institute. Thank you.